Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode. My name is Dana, and I will be your host. And we have Gary Cox as our guest today. Hi, Gary. How are you?
Hey, Dana. I'm good, thank you.
So you're from over the pond now. I'm in the US. You're over in the UK, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, before we get started, why don't you take a minute and just tell us a little bit about you, what you do, the company you work for, all that kind of good stuff.
All right. Yeah, no worries. So, my name's Gary. I've been working at Infoblox for the last 12 years, but I've been in IT generally for far longer than that. Man and boy, one might say. Infoblox is a company that unites networking and security. We try and bring those historical silos together. And really, the subject we're going to talk about today, DNS, is pivotal to that. So, as I said, 12 years here with the company. So, I like to think that I know a little bit about DNS. I'm certainly not the industry's biggest expert, but we do have him on staff, which is good for us.
Wow, that's impressive.
It's always good to go to the guy who wrote the book on this thing, right? So, but yeah, no, DNS is it's a subject that's close to my heart. So hopefully we'll have a good conversation today on this.
Yes, and I think it's going to be very helpful because, as I was just mentioning before, I think there are a lot of people that have absolutely no idea what DNS is. And It's obviously something very important. I know I'm going to learn a lot about it during this conversation. So I think this is going to be a great thing. So why don't we start off with just explaining to people what in the world is DNS?
Absolutely. So DNS is one of those industry acronyms that's been around for forever. In fact, DNS as a protocol turns 40 this year, right? So it's its 40th birthday. That's how long this has been around. So it's great that we're just talking about it. In terms of what it does, so DNS stands for Domain Name Service, and it really is the phone book of the internet. So much like nowadays we've got our mobile device, I never remember anyone's number, sometimes even my own. We all just go into the contacts, we look it up, okay, there's Dana, right, push the button, done. That's basically what our computers are doing. They are doing that number to name to number resolution, the phone book, and they're doing it for everything we do, whether that's going to Google or Office 365 or anything in between. And of course, any service that we have inside our businesses, so whether it be DevOps, cloud services, everything is using DNS. So I don't think I'm sugarcoating it when I say it's the backbone of the internet.
So that's very interesting. So it's 40 years old?
40.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going back now. So is it because that, now I'm really going to sound silly here, but that's basically the start of the internet, right?
You're not far wrong. The internet as a bit of technology, I mean, let's call it that, and that's underplaying it, as a pivotal thing, was a few years before that. There was various connections, there was ARPANET, there was a bunch of other stuff that universities and governments were doing, but DNS was the sea change moment, really, when it became truly usable, because we needed this directory, right, this telephone book, in order to connect all these services, all these companies, everything. I think nowadays, honestly, we all just forget it's there, right? We pick our phones up, our laptops, our tablets, whatever device we're using, connected fridges, home speakers, whatever it may be. We forget that behind the scenes, they're using this 40-year-old protocol to do what they need to do to make our lives better. And it just sits there as, I'm going to be a little disrespectful, it sits there as plumbing, but very important plumbing.
Okay. Well, and isn't it kind of to say basically like, okay, I want to go to Dana's website. So let's say it's cyberdana.com. So instead of like, I would say that to you, it's cyberdana.com, but basically the DNS is 1743, blah, 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 like numbers that then convert it over. So that's where it is. It's we don't think like that. So it's a lot easier to remember the name of a website than it is to remember all that craziness. So just like like you're saying, in the phone, it's like, okay, there's Gary, boom, I'm hitting his name and it's calling your phone number and I don't remember what your phone number is. So, it makes life easier. So that's generally, I guess, what it is. So now let's talk about, what the security risks are, or, what do we have to be concerned about this?
Yeah. So let's keep on theme with your podcasts of recent months, right? All around CMMC and MITRE and NIST and all of these frameworks. It is no surprise that every single one of these frameworks, every single one of these standards contains DNS in it in some form or fashion. It normally reads something along the lines of that you should be inspecting and protecting and blocking at the DNS layer. Now, there's a reason for this, and a very good reason, and you don't need to take my word for it. I'm going to quote, and I'm going to quote from Ann Neuberger, this is a quote from 2020, from when she was head of the NSA, and her quote goes along the lines of, if we just blocked or leveraged DNS for blocking, we could stop around 90%, I think the exact stat was 92% of all malware command and control communications. That is huge. And there's a reason that, like I said, it's included in so many frameworks. There's a reason that our governments put in place these protective DNS services. So the NSA has one for certain organizations who are allowed to use it. In the UK, our own NCSC has the same. So again, for public sector entities and government offices, they're allowed to use it. And across the whole EU, they're building something called DNS for EU. Same thing, right? So it becomes a low-cost, high-impact way of providing very, very broad coverage, good protection.
So that's interesting. So 90%. So I'm always telling people that, basically emails cause 90% of the problems, and human error causes 90% of the problems. So does this relate to that? Does the DNS, because they're coming from domain names, relate to the email?
It does. It absolutely does, Dana. So look, I live here in rural Suffolk in the UK. I do not have a paddock full of unicorns. There are no silver bullets, none of that stuff, right? Defense in depth is what I live and breathe. DNS is just one layer in a good defense. There's the human side of it. There's education. There's, of course, protection from phishing and email inspection, all that stuff. Ultimately, if the link comes through your email and it doesn't get picked up when it's inbound, well, the next best place to pick it up is when the user clicks on it. So when everything else fails. And the same is true of malvertising. And, those adverts that sit down the side of our pages, they're not always good. Sometimes they go into malicious, nasty places. So ultimately, DNS becomes, like I said, a very, very good, low cost, but high coverage place to augment all of your other security controls. So whether that's, XDRs, NDRs, EDRs, everything that ends in a DR nowadays, right? Ultimately, it's a protocol that's sitting there. It's not going to change anytime soon, right? It's been around for 40 years. I don't see the internet changing on a dime, overnight, and it's suddenly vanishing. Not going to happen.
All right, so you sent me over some of these terms. So let's talk about what the difference is. So we have DNS filtering, DNS blocking, and DNS firewalling. Are these all kind of the same thing, or all do they mean different things?
No, they're absolutely the same thing, right? And then the reason I put that in is because sometimes different people in the industry use different terms. Sometimes different vendors use different terms. Ultimately, if I take it back to its grassroots level, when DNS firewalling was first invented, it's actually called response policy zones. So that's the original name for it. If we go looking back in the RFC and we want to go geeking out on that side of the house, but response policy zones is ultimately what it is. But a lot of the time we'll hear it being called DNS filtering, because that's what a service is doing. It's looking through and it's saying, okay, do I know if this destination that I'm trying to go to, this DNS entry, this website, is good, bad, or otherwise? And in the case of my company, we've sort of classified things as known good. Then we have a nice area called suspicious, and suspicious is kind of, we haven't got attribution, we don't know it's APT this or APT that or this particular, but there's just something not quite right about it, right? It's either going to infrastructure, it looks bad, or it's registered in a bad place, or whatever it is. So that's kind of getting ahead of it. And then you've got the situation where we all know it's bad. We know it's a particular malware downloader family or whatever. So of course we want to block that. So yeah, filtering is a nice way of describing it, because it's sifting the good from the suspect to the bad.
Are you having a hard time finding new customers? A lot of folks just like you in the IT and cybersecurity space are in the same situation. and they have embraced a new opportunity to get new clients. They're doing this by growing their online presence and maximizing the power of LinkedIn. How, you ask? I have a tried and tested method called my Cyber Social Program. I myself have been on LinkedIn and now have over 3.5 million LinkedIn views, and over on YouTube, I have over 750,000 video views. So I can show you exactly how I have done that so that you can promote your organization and become the authority in your industry. And the best part is, I've done all of this organically without one paid ad. You don't need to waste your money over on Google with pay-per-click ads. Now's the time to establish yourself. Look around, the competition isn't doing it. This is your time to shine online before they do. So if you're ready to start your online journey and future-proof your business, please, down below, click the link and schedule a time for us to have a 45-minute call where I can review the exact methodology of the Cyber Social Program. You can also click below to see some of my masterclasses, which will give you quick little snippets of a couple of things you can do right away on LinkedIn that will help with your profile. I hope to see you and hear from you soon.
Okay. And is this all basically private sector? Is the government doing any of this stuff? Are they just holding the individual businesses responsible, or what's the involvement with that?
So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, if I look at the government side of things, so the NSA absolutely has a service that they provide free of charge for certain US entities who are, I believe I'm correct in saying, sort of typically linked to DoD. Right? That's on the American side of things. In the UK, we've got the NCSC. They run a service called the Protective DNS Service. So PDNS, which sometimes gets confused with a different terminology, which is passive DNS, but anyway, protective DNS. And it's similar. So whilst it's not just DoD over here on this side of the pond, it's any public sector organization. So that could be schools, colleges, universities, hospitals, obviously government offices. They all have the ability to use that. Australia has done something similar with their NCSC. And as I said, the EU is going to be launching its DNS for EU. So yes, there are pockets of this around the world. But it's not broad brush. I mean, certainly if I look at obviously the UK is the one I know the best out of all of them. There is no mandate to say thou must use this service. It's very much, it's here, you can use it, you can, hopefully protect yourself better, but people still don't always adopt it. There's always a gap, but I guess that's security, right? You can tell people to the blue in the face, they don't always do something.
Yeah, and I also think part of the problem is they probably don't know that they need to be doing something specifically with this. So what would you recommend that a small or medium-sized business that's kind of managing their, security on their own, like what should they be doing?
Yes, I mean, the first thing they should do is they should look at the security stack that they're using. There may well be a vendor in that stack already who can provide some of this service or ingest the data needed to use it, right? If you haven't got it in your stack, I suggest going out there and looking for a way of doing that. Now, there are vendors out there like us, of course, but there are other ways of doing this as well. So, I mean, sometimes you can ingest the data into the firewall. Sometimes you can have free services that can do it. Sometimes you can switch it on the DNS server that you've already got, right? So it's just a question of, as you rightly said, knowing that you need these capabilities, and then figuring out the right way to do it for your organization. And chances are that right way will be different if you're, a small SME versus, someone who's, Fortune 500 or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So basically what they want to do is they want to go through whatever protective attributes they have with their system and look for DNS filtering, DNS firewall, something along those lines. Or if they have an IT person, they want to say to them, hey, what are we doing for DNS filtering? And if they have an outsourced IT company, same thing. They want to ask, what are we doing about this? And if they're doing it completely themselves and they're not really sure, they could go back to where they bought their domain, right? Because a lot of those offer that DNS filtering, I believe. Like if you buy the domain from GoDaddy or something, can't you do it that way?
Probably
No.
not. Probably not. Some of them do, but what I would say is, if all else fails, there are some good, reputable public sources out there. So there's an organization called GCA, Global Cyber Alliance. Global Cyber Alliance runs a service called Quad9. So that's, if you're changing the IP address of your DNS server, it would be 9.9.9.9. So things like that can be good for consumers and very, very small enterprises. The challenge with that, Dana, and it's like everything in security, right? The further I get away from the user, and if I'm doing it in a cloud service like Quad9, great, I've got a level of protection. What I don't have is a level of visibility. So for an enterprise, I can't then say, okay, it was, Gary in the library with a lead pipe, right? I can't do that. And they need to get to that sort of forensic level, because I mean, I'm sure you've probably in one of your many podcasts talk about mean time to resolution, right? The speed in which we need to find and resolve something inside an organization. You can't do that if you're too far down the chain.
So listen, I haven't talked about that, but we should do another video on that, because that's that's a very important, right? How quickly can we identify what's going on here? So it's like a crime, right? They always say the first 48 hours of a crime, if somebody gets murdered or something, that's Absolutely. The most important time. So I'm sure that's probably what you're talking about, something similar to that.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah, exactly.
All right, good. Well, I'm gonna call you back and we're gonna do another video on that. Okay. All right. So our last question here. So doesn't blocking DNS just create a high false positive rate? What does that mean?
Okay, so this comes back a little bit to exactly what we were just talking about. So the worst thing we could possibly do, especially in an enterprise, is they've got alerts coming in from their firewall, from their antivirus, from their EDR, XDR, or whatever endpoint protection they've got. And typically these companies are drowning under a ton of events every single day that their security operations folk cannot get through. So the last thing we want to do is to add to that problem. So whilst we could acknowledge, yep, DNS is absolutely a very positive place to put some protection, the quality of the data that we are ingesting has to be spot on, absolutely spot on. And if it's not, we end up with what we call high false positives. In other words, we're blocking stuff that we shouldn't be. And that's not good, because then it sends them on a wild goose chase. They're triaging things they don't need to be triaging, and so on, right? Which then unfortunately exacerbates the problem, because then you start missing stuff, and that mean time to resolution increases, and then the CISO probably gets fired. Not a good situation. So yeah, no, it's really, really important when we're doing this to make sure that it's a clean, trusted, and the word I'm going to put in here is the key one, curated set of intelligence that you get through that you then leverage on your DNS service, because that's the key. Things move around, domain names change, IP addresses change. What was bad yesterday won't necessarily be bad tomorrow. It might have been compromised at a point in time. Really, really important to make sure it's curated, and that's how we get the false positives down.
Well, another thing that I always like to think about too is with the end users, the non-technical employees that are getting annoyed because things are getting blocked or they can't get access to things like that. Mm-hmm. That is why we have such a big battle with cybersecurity, because there's a fine line between balancing, making sure we're blocking all the bad stuff and not blocking too much stuff. So then they get annoyed and then they just start trying to circumvent anything that they can just to get around things. But so that's
absolutely. And that's actually one of the reasons why blocking on DNS instead of on the IP address is so important, because if you block on the IP address, there could be 10,000 websites behind that. If it's hosted on some CDN or some popular hosting platform, that's not good, right? Whereas with DNS, we're just blocking that one bit. Same as if you're doing it on a proxy and you're blocking it on the URL, you're just blocking. So it's more like a laser pointer than a flashlight, right?
Okay. Yeah, that's a big difference. A good point. All right. So then before we go, just real quick. So your company, who is your ideal customer? Is it a big company, a small company, international? Who's your customer?
Do you know what? We work with so many different companies, and we're global. So we've got offices in the US and across the whole of the world. I would say probably the main ones that I work with, so I'm in the enterprise team. So we work with people who in the UK are sort of FTSE 100, FTSE 250 type companies. But Infoblox as a whole works with the full gambit. So we've got a federal team in the US. We've got a commercial team who is responsible for companies who are kind of 5,000 users and below. Right. So yeah, anyone can happily come and talk to us. Right. We're not gonna turn people away if they need to have a conversation about how to use and how to leverage DNS. Happy to do that.
Okay, good. And I'm sure if they went to the website, they would learn a little bit more about DNS too. So that's good. Make sure we send people there. All right. Well, this was really, really helpful and awesome information that, like I said, I think a lot of people need a little bit of help when it comes to this stuff. And I really appreciate your time and expertise with all this.
Pleasure.
All right. Well, that was great. Thank you very much. And I'm going to call you back because I think that's a great other topic that you're talking about with the whole, what did you call it? Time to.
Yeah, it's a mean time to remediation. So MTTR is yet another industry acronym.
Okay, perfect. Well, we're going to do another video on that. But until then, thank you very much for your time today. And everyone else, thank you very, very much for watching. And we'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye. Okay, perfect. That was great.
All right.
Turn the recording off here. So we